Hello and welcome everyone to Global Minds, the Harvard Alumni for Global Development podcast. This is your host Vivek. Here in Global Minds, we invite global development professionals from different walks of life and talk about their experience of trying to make the world a better place. Today, for our first in-person episode, and I'm very excited this is happening in my hometown in Kathmandu, Nepal, I am even more excited to have someone with me whom I've admired for a long time and who is doing amazing work here in Nepal, Dr. Pukar Malla. Thank you so much for coming, Dai. Welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So before I move on to my questions, I want to give a short introduction of Dr. Malla. Dr. Pukar Malla leads the Daayitwa Abhiyaan, translated as the Responsibility Movement, which is striving for an enterprising Nepal where every individual has opportunities for a prosperous future. Within the Daayitwa Abhiyaan umbrella are three main organizations that he co-founded and currently chairs. The Daayitwa NGO, which fosters entrepreneurship and government innovations, Governance Lab, which conducts research and advocates for evidence-based policy making, and the Nepal Leadership Academy, which nurtures leadership in youth and public leaders. Dr. Malla was previously a senior innovation policy specialist at the World Bank and a senior research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. He has a PhD in electrical engineering from Cornell and an MPA from the Harvard Kennedy School. And he also serves as the Nepal program's country director for the Harvard South Asia Institute. Is there anything you'd like to add to that introduction, Dai?
Thank you very much for the generous introduction. The only thing I'd probably add is I'm a student of two of the world's best teachers of humanity, my two beautiful young daughters.
That's so sweet. No, thank you for adding that, Dai. And just for our listeners, I'll be referring to Dr. Malla as Pukar Dai. So Dai is a Nepali term which literally means elder brother, but it's also a term for respect and I think breaks that formality barrier a little bit. And I think people in my circle know you as Dai. Do you like being called Dai?
Sure. Whatever works for you.
Awesome. So I think I want to start from the start of your journey in global development broadly. So you started your career as an electrical engineer. You got a PhD in the field. You joined Intel and other high-tech companies. You were making microprocessors and other things, I think. You even got 2 US patents. But then you suddenly made a 360-degree, what seemed like a 360-degree turn to joining the Harvard Kennedy School for the Master's in Public Administration. And then soon you also started working for the World Bank. How did that transition happen?
Life is always filled with transitions and changes. So, I remember in 2008, when I was just about to begin my PhD program at Cornell, I met one of my mentors. And the mentor asked me, why do you want to do a PhD in wireless circuit design? And I said, I come from a country which has a lot of mountains. So, if I study wireless engineering, it will do good for my nation. So my mentor smiled and said, well, that can't be that can't be an excellent reason or a good reason for doing a PhD. It should probably be like, you want to create the world's lowest power chip or the fastest processor, something of that type, right? I think that says something about sort of this journey. Over time, I did do a lot of research. I did publish. Like you said, have some patents in the US. But what I realized was, after sort of a decade in the US, these college degrees, these titles, these honors, they weren't making me happy enough. I mean, I'm very thankful and grateful, and I enjoyed all of that process, but I still noted that there was this gap, right? And so I began to ask myself, why is this gap? We strive for all these things. Now I have these things. Why am I still looking for something else? So then I, remembered all these happy moments in my life, right? So I had to sort of do a happiness mapping of when in the US I was happiest, and I realized something quite epiphanic one of those days. I realized that, a person is happiest when a person does something that flourishes that person's identity.
Identity.
Yes, right? And for me, that was in being a Nepali, in serving Nepal, in doing things for the world, right? Then it was all about, then how do I connect my background in technology with this new world of development, right? So technology with development. And this is where I found a beautiful space called innovation.
So Nepal was always in the picture, right, from the start. I think I want to come back to that part in a bit. But how was your experience at the Kennedy School? How do you recall your time there?
Kennedy School was wonderful. It was very real and very unreal, right? So it's interesting. When I went to Kennedy School, I thought I was going to take a lot of classes in economics, take a lot of courses that would sort of like, make me proficient in this tech world as in economics, macroeconomics, right? So all of that.
Technical. Field, right.
But what I realized there was I took those courses, but I was more fascinated by courses on leadership, courses on innovation policies, right? Which is sort of like, where I also came from, because, I had done a lot of technology development and I was always more interested in the people side of technology. So if I want to do more people side of technology, then I need to understand where people are, how they think, how they adopt a technology or they don't adopt a technology, right? And I'm so thankful that the Kennedy School just had a space for that too. And so I was able to explore these interests. But I was always like so profoundly touched by all these people, the professors, right? Professors Marshall Gans and Ron Heifetz like changed the way I defined and practiced leadership. Like I remember Professor Ricardo Hausman and Matt Andrews sort of changed the way I looked at development or did development, right? So very like that's very real, and but also I remember meeting all these people that were like almost unreal. They're the most humble people that have done amazing things in their countries. Some of them were politicians, some were NGO workers. So that was unreal, sort of meeting them in live and learning from them about their experiences, working with them. So all in all, I think Kennedy School was a very much of a redefining experience for me. Because I was used to, think about this, right? There's a person who has thought the person would be an engineer, the person became an engineer, lived that life for 10 years, and now wants to go into this world of development. That's when I found Harvard.
Right. And I think as someone who just came out of a master's program experience, I can very much relate to what you are saying right there. And I think you touched upon leadership and innovation. And I feel like that is a thread that you've carried throughout until today and probably even in the future. And I'll come to that in a bit as well. But also part of your Kennedy School experience was also leading the Harvard Graduate Student Council. You were, if I'm not mistaken, first Nepali to be a president of the council. How was your experience in leading that body?
Real and unreal. It was amazing. I learned so much. I think the 2 years at the Kennedy School and Harvard broadly were very significant. I was, my first year at Kennedy School, I was mostly in the Kennedy School. But, we go to Harvard not only for the school, right? We go there because we want to do something in the world. But that something in the world is not limited to that school only, right? There are 12 professional schools. So I always wanted to reach out and learn from other schools and work with the communities in other schools. So there are many things that I hadn't thought of I'd learn, and I did, like running for elections. Right? I didn't run for any of these types of elections. Right? There are 12 schools, and you have to garner votes and then win. Right? And so you have to lobby. And after you win, you need support, so you have to build coalitions. You have to understand what the different schools want. They're diverse. I mean, divinity schools thinks very differently from law school, thinks differently from ed school, right? So, but we all have one goal, right? I think, which is around, I think at Harvard, it's really about service. And for service, we want to groom leadership, like in people, right? So I found it really nice to be able to work with diverse set of people and bring them together. There are two things that we did which I am happy about. One was at Harvard, there are all these student groups that lived in different schools. So it was important that the students found a way of uniting.
Right.
Like if there's a Pakistani group at Kennedy School, there's a Pakistani group at law school, there's one at business school, right? And it's so important that they all band together to ensure more coherence and but also sustainability of activities, right? So we're able to lobby with the president's office and get that officialized. We also started Harvard's first annual Harvard Leadership Conference. So there are a few things. Anyways, it was very learningful and enjoyable.
I remember watching your, I think, campaign speech video. It seems to be pretty popular on YouTube. And no, I think you're pretty on point with your, what you hope to do. Now I think I want to move to what I see as the second turning point of your life. So the first one we discussed was when you switched careers from engineering to development. And then the second I see is when you decided to return to Nepal. So you had finished Kennedy School and then briefly went back to Kennedy School again as a senior fellow, which if we can connect later, I think might be useful. But then you were working at the World Bank. You had a comfortable life, as it seems from outside, but then you decided to come back to Nepal, leave all of that. Why did you make that decision? What was there?
Like I said earlier, happiness is really about being you, right? Doing something that you identify with. And success is about being that best version of you. If I want to continue on this journey and make real meaningful impact in Nepal, so one way it was for me was to stay in the US and sort of contribute to the different activities that I wanted to do in Nepal by supporting teams here. Another one was to come here and do it myself, right? So those were the two approaches. I always had that yearning to come back. I mean, the writing was on the wall for me, I think. In fact, I remember when I left for the US, I remember I'd got into early decision at Swarthmore. So I had saved a T-shirt that said, we'll work for peace, right? And so my point is, I knew I wanted to come back. I just didn't know the why, the how, and the what, because I was too young then. So while working at the World Bank and doing all of this, I realized, I want to be back and I'll do something here, right? But to do exactly what and how was then not clear, but at that point, I had to make that decision. And so, because I had already started the work on Daayitwa, it was just about time. I remember this was 2015, there was the great earthquake in Nepal.
Right.
And so I thought it was time. It was time to come back and explore and what I could do in Nepal and do it myself.
Do you remember it as a hard decision, or was it something that was planned, like you already had it in mind, you were just waiting for the right moment?
The decision was sort of like made, it was just the when. So part of that had to do with my wife being ready to.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, she was working in the US for about 2 years. So right after the earthquake, we both were ready and then we returned. Now, look, at that point, we didn't think too much. In life sometimes you know where you want to be or what you want to do.
What's the right thing?
And you don't analyze it too much, right? Because you love it.
Yeah.
You love that idea, right?
Yeah.
And there are risks, but then you like it. So we jumped. We bought 2 one-way tickets.
Uh,
That was that.
wow. Yeah. You know, I think I was also have been living in the U.S. And now kind of transitioning, and then there's a group of Nepali people that are sort of in a similar boat as me, you know, who went there, studied, and then are working now, and then always have this small thought that, you know, maybe I want to go back, maybe I want to do this, but then the right moment never comes. So I think I don't know. For you, it seemed like it came together at that point.
Yeah, but you know, when I say all of this, I think you can contribute to Nepal and bolster your identity as a Nepali from other parts of the world too.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are other elements to your identity as well. So it just doesn't need to be related to Nepal. At this point, that is something that I'm thinking a lot about.
Right.
But so I want to make 2 points. Firstly, I think it is you can be serving the country from other places as well, because you need to sort of, you know, figure out what that alignment is, right? If that alignment, inner alignment with what you do and who you are is not there, you don't want that too. And the second part is, you know, Nepali people could be doing many other things, right? And we should.
Yeah.
We should be, you know, inventing, you know, the best innovations. We should be doing other things in the world as well. Yeah.
Right. I think now I want to move to Daayitwa. What is the Daayitwa Abhiyaan? What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the pain you're trying to alleviate? And what is the change that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah. Well, you've sort of gotten us started by talking about Daayitwa Abhiyaan at the beginning. Abhiyaan means campaign. Daayitwa means responsibility, right? So Daayitwa Abhiyaan is about the glow from within. It's the light from within, right? Because, you know, when we talk about duty, it's sort of like something that gets put on your shoulder, right? And at some point that it can get heavier, because the more duties you have, your shoulders can, you know, it can be weary. But if it's the light from within, it always guides you. It's not heavy. It comes from within you, right? That's why I keep talking about happiness is where our heart is, right? Now, Daayitwa Abhiyaan is striving for an enterprising Nepal where every person has opportunities for a prosperous future. What that means is, in Nepal there has been a significant focus on socio-political empowerment. If you look at Nepal's narrative, you know, and we've seen many changes in the country in terms of social changes, social development indicators have improved. We've seen so many political transitions. We have now the new constitution and federalism, so, you know, many changes. But if you look at economic growth, it was probably in the 90s that we saw an economic juncture, or we're just seeing the beginnings of, just as India liberalized, just as Nepal liberalized, right? But that was that. There was the Maoist rebellion, and, you know, we haven't seen anything since then. So I think what's extremely important in the country is economic growth, with the lens of, I mean, with of course equity and inclusion, but we want to look at, we need to work on economic growth, keeping a socio-political lens. So that's what Daayitwa Abhiyaan is about. We have 4 organizations, 3 in Nepal, 1 in the US, all have different sort of missions, right? One focuses on youth employment and youth and policy making. Daayitwa, the NGO. The other governance lab focuses on policy research and building state capability. The leadership academy focuses on leadership trainings, Nepal-based leadership trainings, right? And Nepal Rising on creating communities in the US diaspora and connecting them with Nepal. So different missions, but the vision, the shared vision is the same. Now, all of this for economic development, but if I were to sort of like even give you one of the sort of stories, you see that every day about 2,000 to 2,500 Nepalis are leaving Nepal for opportunities abroad.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people every day leaving the country. We also have about 3 to 5 corpses of these people return to Nepal because of atrocious work conditions abroad. People are choosing the probability of death over the possibility of hope. Right?
Yeah.
That says a lot about, where we are not. Right? So that the fact that we didn't see that economic juncture, the fact that we don't have enough opportunities, the fact that people do not see hope in the country is propelling these young people outside of the nation. Right? So that's a very significant issue that we need to work on at the grassroots level and at the governance level. So if I were to think about sort of the change that, what I see as, what would make me happy, I see, a lot of thousands of young entrepreneurs, particularly in rural Nepal, particularly because I think that youth, women and marginalized groups, I think for the next 2 decades, Nepal needs to focus on inclusion and connect it with growth. Extremely important to connect inclusion with economic growth, right?
Yeah.
That's vital, and thus I see thousands of youth entrepreneurs across Nepal, especially in rural regions, thrive and create these big enterprises. I see a lot of young people in policy making, and we are beginning to see that, right? In the cabinet, in the parliament, in municipalities, in bureaucracy, and I want to see a lot of women in leadership positions leading meaningful change, right? And I think we all have to work together on many of these aspects.
No, and that's a very noble and happy vision. We're talking about Nepal, but I think this is also, generalizable to other countries as well. We see countries facing similar problems of brain drain and economic recession and, losing of hope, as you mentioned. I got the change that you are trying to achieve, but I think I'm still not clear on the problem that you identified. So you mentioned lack of economic opportunities. What is the problem? Is it, I also saw in your website, you said there's a leadership crisis. Is the problem in leadership? Is the problem in mindset, behavior, culture? Is it global forces influencing us? What is the problem?
Problem galore, right? It's an adaptive challenge that we are facing. So it'd be difficult for me to say this is the problem. If it's an adaptive problem, you have to learn about what the problem really is over time. So I can tell you some of the things I see, right? At the mindset level, as is related to leadership, people are beginning to lose hope.
Hope in a better future?
A better future in the country. I also see a lot of young people flocking for immediate results. So, a lot of that is because of desperation also, right? Because you have been in so much of pain, you want relief. And when you see a fast route to relief in the form of income and freedom, why not? If there are these mindset challenges, one immediately thinks about, okay, do we have leadership to address them? We see a leadership crisis as well. Because leadership is about enabling others to achieve that shared purpose, right, in uncertain times. But here we have leadership as position, leadership as power, people in leadership positions using that for themselves, for their individual or family purposes as opposed to collective purposes, right? So I think at this point in the country, it's important, this is why it's important to redefine what leadership means, build young leaders who can work towards the change.
So what does development mean for you then?
I'm going to give you 2 examples. So, when I just returned to Nepal 10 years ago, there's a big mall, Labim Mall. You know that mall, right?
Yeah.
It's the first big mall in Lalitpur. all malls or like shopping places usually were in Kathmandu. So I remember taking my daughter there, and because there aren't too many spaces to hang out. And when my sister from the US came, I would take her there and show them, oh, look, Nepal is developing, right? We have these big buildings. But now when I look at it, this mall has a lot of shops, and these shops most of the shops are bringing in products and clothes from outside. And we are buying it at a high price. Money is going outside, right? So what I'm realizing is, it's important to have big buildings, big malls, but what does that mean for the country, right? Where are we headed, right, is an important question. Second example, I just came back from Alumni province, where I visited 7 municipalities, and I met with maybe in each place about a dozen mayors, deputy mayors, bureaucrats. And I realized that development there means road. So, and it's not just for the politicians, also for the commoners, the citizens. They want a road to their house. That is development for them. In some sense, that's right. But then the question becomes, what are we using the road for? If the road is bringing you expensive refrigerators, televisions, through hard-earned money in Middle East, remittance money to your home, or are you creating, like production, products that you're, using the road to sell, right? So road, buildings, these are infrastructures. And I think that's what development generally means. At this point, after seeing Nepal so closely for a decade, I think development is also that.
Right.
I'm not saying it's not that, but it is so much also about human capacity. It's so important to think about, where is our capacity? Because if we are not going to be strong from within, we're only going to look outside for our strength.
Right.
So we need to redefine development.
Yeah, I totally agree. So you're saying it's not just about infrastructures, the buildings, the roads, but also about self-sustainability, sustainability of communities, of families, and about empowerment of individual, but also society and nation as sort of an economic, self-sustaining community.
Yeah, because the people that live inside these buildings, the people that, walk those roads, have to be able to make use of the infrastructure to achieve a shared purpose for the country, which at this point I think is economic growth. So if we don't have human capacity to be able to go on that equitable growth journey, then this is not development. We're not developing.
Right, right. And a part of that capacity building is leadership development, which you also work on, right? But was all of this work, was it necessary to do this on your own, start this on your own? You were at the World Bank, you had a platform there. There's many organizations working in Nepal with similar ideas, may not be the same. Couldn't you have joined one of these organizations and, started from there?
Yeah, no, I think there are different ways of working on development, and you highlighted some of them. So there are these international development organizations, right, like the one that I was working at, the World Bank in Washington, D.C. There are many aspects of the World Bank that are wonderful in terms of, assuring, change and development in the country, but there are also limitations. At this point, today I can go meet any minister, any government secretary, anyone in the country. I don't need any approvals from anyone, right?
Because of your work
I have
with
freedom.
Daayitwa.
Yeah, through Daayitwa.
Right.
So I can work in a structure which provides me the freedom, which if I handle with responsibility, I can go innovate. in big organizations, for good reasons, they need to ensure compliance. So I have more of that here. Now, when you talk about other organizations, when I started this journey in Nepal in 2008, I didn't see significant work being done on promoting enterprise capability in rural Nepal. So there was a lot of focus on self-entrepreneurship, self-employment, but I think it's important to accelerate enterprises in rural Nepal so they create jobs there. Thankfully the country has entered into federalism, so now we have 753 places, right? And of the 753, just working on the urban place is not enough, right? So at that point there wasn't, I thought, enough work being done in a few areas, such as rural enterprise development, even encouraging more youth in policy making. A lot of the times, young people, if they wanted to contribute to policy making, what do? If you don't know people who live inside Singhadarbar, if you don't have people that have been ministers, how do you work on these research opportunities, right? Especially if you're studying abroad. So there are these gaps. Obviously, we talked about the larger problems. To address those problems, we need platforms. I saw that there were gaps in terms of those platforms existing or not existing, or if they're existent, not in the way that would allow for innovation. So this is why I started Daayitwa. But I agree, I don't think we need to always start new organizations. I think we can also join organizations. And at this point in my life, like, I am sort of at a stage where I think, not only personally, but I would want to support other organizations. That's also where I am. But also I think collaboration is so important. If organizations sort of like come together, then they can innovate in ways that they haven't.
Yeah. No, I think that's very important, especially if we want to have impact in a large scale, instead of starting every individual coming and starting something on their own. You mentioned that you have the freedom to go to Singhadarbar, the place, the main administrative building of Nepal, and meet any minister, any secretary. But I can imagine when you first came to Nepal, even if you had the freedom, you didn't have that network, right?
Yeah, of course not.
Like I don't know most people there. And I would think it would have been easier if you were representing the World Bank, for example, and had that tag to be able to get through that door. Was that part challenging at the beginning?
Yeah. So it's not like I have access to everyone now.
Yeah.
Don't get that impression. I'm working on it. I just mean to say that when you're an organization, a small organization, then you have more freedom, right? Than when you're a big organization, because you have to think about a lot of things.
Right.
So yes, when I came to Nepal, trust was a big challenge. Establishing trust was a big challenge, and for very valid reasons. Why should these government people trust this person who spent 17 years abroad, whereas they have been toiling here, working hard here, doing everything here? Why should they be listening to this person who probably is going to preach again, like many other people that came in suits to my room, showed me these policy papers, made those presentations, and said this is the way to develop, right? So I think it takes time. It certainly takes time, and at that point it took time. I remember waiting for hours to meet with some secretaries, joint secretaries. Lots of sweat, lots of blood and sweat has gone into all of this to where we are now, where government officials trust us, and they trust us because we have been persistent. One of the things that I said to myself when I returned was, I said, no matter what, I'll do this for 10 years.
You were set on it.
Yeah, I said to myself, because you can say, okay, I'll get started, I'll do it for 1 to 2 years, I'll build enough of sort of traction, CV, network, and then I will do. This is really what I want to do. But this sort of like civil society route is to begin with only, right? And I said to myself, no, I'll do this for 10 years. Because, you know, when you do it for 10 years, then, you know, you really, you know, take yourself through this journey of understanding the system that you're working in, right? And then you also realize or don't realize, you know, whether there's that alignment or not. You know, who know, I mean, maybe in the first you can get lucky, right? So somebody sees your Harvard tag and then, you know, offers you all these things. But not for 10 years. Right? So I think one of the things that government officials or people at the grassroots level are liking is because we're persistently doing it. Right? So building trust was a critical challenge. Garnering resources was as well. I mean, there are different ways of, you know, amassing resources, but I didn't know that. I mean, I was like, I was an engineer in the US, right? I knew how to design chips. I didn't know how to like raise funds and convince donors. I still don't. I'm learning my ropes, right? The other big challenge, Vivek, that I realize now that I was facing then was, I thought that, you know, you do good work and everybody will recognize and realize and come around and then say, okay, let's work together. It doesn't work that way in development. It's not only important to do good work, it's important to talk about it. It's important to communicate what you're doing. It's important that you be perceived the way it is important to be perceived for you to create that meaningful impact. Not in a manipulative sense. Your public narrative needs to be clear. It doesn't need to, I mean, and it's an honest public narrative. It's not manipulative, right? And I didn't realize that then. I thought, you know, you invent, you create something new, people will like it, love it, and they'll come around. So it doesn't work that way. The other big challenge when I started here was managing family and, you know, and work at the same time. Because I hadn't been back in Nepal for good. This was the first time, no?
Yeah.
It's different when you're coming home for 3 months, the way your family, the way the society looks at you, right? When you're here for good, then it's very clear that you've now let go of all the affiliations, associations abroad, and you're here, just like everyone else, right? So you have the access just like many of others. So, but it's been a wonderful journey of learning.
Yeah. No, I think, and because I was associated with Daayitwa for a bit, I know the tagline is turning challenges into opportunities. So I bet, you know, these challenges, you somehow found opportunities in them. And the big narrative that we also touched upon is it's really hard to work in Nepal. You know, there's so many roadblocks, so many obstacles, the lack of hope, as we mentioned. People want to do good, but, you know, they are not allowed to do good. Is that true? Did you find that that's true? What message do you have for youths like us who think that, you know, coming back to Nepal and, you know, taking this journey like you did is not my cup of tea?
The first question to ask yourself is, what is your cup of tea? Because I don't want to begin by saying this needs to be one.
Everyone's cup of tea.
Right?
Right.
I think it's important to, you know, so figure out what you like and love, and, you know, I mean, I did my happiness mapping in December 2008, around that time, and then January 2009 I applied to Kennedy School. So, you know, you need to do, and it doesn't need to be done like I did by actually writing it down. You can do it over time. You need to know what makes you happy. Go back to your life and sort of like think about the times where you're happiest, right? Or not. So that's the first thing. Now, the second part is I do want to dispel the thinking that nothing can happen in the country. Change is impossible. There's no hope. I don't think that is true. I don't think that's true. If that's true, why do we have electricity today? Right? In Nepal, there was like rampant load shedding. We don't. How is it possible that we have this doctor who does these amazing cataract surgeries, right, and is known as the god of sight, and he doesn't do it only in Nepal, in so many other countries at very low cost, able to provide those services, right? Yes, there are systemic hurdles, but it's possible to innovate. And like you said, you know, if there are those challenges, then you look for opportunities, right? So I saw that young people didn't have the opportunity to influence policy decisions, so we created the fellowship program. I also saw that young people like yourself who were just graduating want to know what Nepal is all about, didn't have that opportunity. So you want like sort of a safe place to come experiment, right? And so we created that platform, and look, you're here, right? You graduated, you're here, you're exploring. And in fact, just the other day after I met you, I met another a fellow, Sushant Vaidik, who graduated from London School of Economics. He was a fellow in Alumni province, and he returned to Nepal with a one-way ticket because he was he let go of a good, a well-paying job, and he's now advisor to the Chief Minister's office in Alumni province, right? So that's hope, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so I think that connecting who you are with addressing those systemic challenges, right? And it's just not Nepal. I mean, in every place around the world, there are different types of challenges, right? When Prabal died in New York, you know, what we see of him today is that successful PG brand. We don't know how hard it was for this man to make it there, no?
Right. Prabal Gurung, the fashion designer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was it easy for him? Didn't he face many types of systemic challenges that, you know, that he had to surmount, whether it was with regards to gender, whether it was with regards to a foreign person, whether it was the fashion industry? So many of them, no? So those systemic challenges live in all parts of the world, right? The question is, you know, are you passionate about something that enables you to overcome them? Just the same way
Right.
Prabal Dai was able to overcome that. And then there are people that are sort of like, you know, thinking about Nepal and the United States, Nepal and somewhere else also. So those possibilities also exist.
Yeah. So would you say the Daayitwa model is applicable outside of Nepal in other contexts? Or is there something particular about the context that we're in that is unique only to this place?
I think the Daayitwa model is probably, in some sense, it is applicable globally, and many senses it's more applicable to developing context. I think, look, it's important whether it's developing nation to do it from your heart, right? If you're in the White House serving the people of America, you need to do it from your heart, right? And that is essentially Daayitwa, right? So if the message is around how do you bring innovation and leadership together, it's the same, I think, right? Oftentimes we want to innovate, but we don't think about the context in which you're innovating as much. You have sort of thought about it from a supply side, but you haven't really empathized with the people that you're trying to serve. You haven't really thought about, you know, the context. So you need a lot of empathy and respect in the things that you do, right? So this is how, you know, we bring leadership and innovation together. So many of these learnings are, I think, like sort of global. But if we go to more of the specifics of what we are doing, through Daayitwa, we are trying to address, you know, various challenges that live in Nepal. For instance, demographics of the country, a very sort of demographically young country, but youth are power minority. A lot of issues around inclusion, you know, gender issues. These are issues that still, but you know, persist in the country, right? Economics is weak. A lot of import, very little export, right? So the trade deficit is high. There's so many aspects from a micro to macro level, right? You know, so people losing hope. So I think these are features that probably are more part and parcel of developing nations. So in terms of programmatic level, you know, what we're doing, they're probably more applicable in developing nations. But if you think about it more philosophically, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think I really love your redefinition in a way of responsibility, is that it's not it's not a burden. It's something that comes from your heart. It's a uplifting feeling, and I think if you feel that, I can see that's what gets you up in the morning. And you've been continuing. And has your 10 years passed, or are you still?
No, it's past.
It's past. Have you set another benchmark for yourself now?
Yeah, this is what I've been thinking about, Vivek. So, I've handed over Daayitwa. There's a new team in place. There's a new executive director. I'm very thankful to Sushit, who heads, you met him, right? Who heads the organization. There's another, for governance lab, there's someone. So for all organizations, there's someone. I'm now thinking about two things. Firstly, let me say three things. Firstly, I'm thinking about, from an organizational perspective, I think it's important to go to scale. Right? So we have been piloting. Now I think it's very important we think about turning those pilots into systemic innovations, whether through the government or we are in 753 municipalities. Whether government sort of, because what we do is sort of in the area of public service, so it's a public good, right? And so it's difficult to imagine private sector intervening in these rural areas to make money off the types of interventions that we do. So either the government sort of adopts these models, or we become the BRAC of Nepal and take these models to 753 municipalities, right? So that's sort of like something that we need to decide and advance. That's the next set of experimentations for us. That's one part. The other part, which is true for me and for the organization as well, is collaboration. At the end of the day, this is a campaign. Right? My country, my responsibility is not just any one organization's, right? The word Daayitwa, we have an organization named Daayitwa, but the word Daayitwa means like responsibility, right? So there are many organizations, private, public, social organizations doing brilliant work with the same sort of thinking, my country, my responsibility, right? So how do we band together? How do we bring in our resources, ideas, energies to create impact? And this is where I think Daayitwa need to focus on. But for me, I want to also think beyond Daayitwa. I want to think about how I can support other organizations achieve what they want to achieve. That's sort of a direction that I'm headed.
Right.
And I'm beginning to have those exploratory conversations. I'm also beginning to, and I said I would do this earlier, but wasn't able to. I want to mull more over like what I've learned and turn that into write-ups, books, so knowledge that I can share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, best of luck for that, and thank you for sharing your part of your wisdom here today. And although we focused on your journey and Daayitwa's journey and your work in Nepal, I think for our audience, say in global development who are Harvard alumni or outside, I think people are working in their own context will also have something that they found useful and helpful to help them in their journey. I definitely did. So thank you so much for this conversation, and hope to continue having this relationship with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Vivek.